Being a single mom and doing it all by yourself is brutal. Learn the brain and energy tools to get back to your center and overcome your challenges. Welcome to Single Moms Doing It All, the podcast. This is Muriel, your host. Today, I have a guest who's a mom too. She has 2 kids. And I'm going to let you know more about her, which I forgot to put her last name in the intro. So I'll ask her. It will come. Sandra is a mom of 2, the owner of Family Personalities and the co-host of the Family Personalities podcast. A fun and sometimes cheesy podcast that uses your personality type to help change the way you see your family. She uses her experience and training in the Myers-Briggs personality type to work one-on-one with families. And I will let her tell you more about it in her own words because I'm going to bring her in right now. Hi, Sandra. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. So first and foremost, what's your last name? I forgot to put it on my little cheat sheet to read.
It's Etherington with a soft the.
Hetherington.
Etherington, yeah.
I will put it in the description. That's the result of being an organic raw podcast, but it will be in the description, as I said. So I know you're a mom of 2. I know you're self-employed. And I would love for you to let us know how you got to doing what you're doing today so that we can also inspire other moms to see that it is possible to be a mom and self-employed.
Yeah, what was the first question? You asked me to tell how I got to be what I'm doing today. Was that the only question? Sorry.
Yeah, just tell us your story about it.
Yeah, I was first introduced to personality type, specifically the Myers-Briggs personality type model, when I was working in the corporate world.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to it through, it actually wasn't a training that I attended, but it was a training that many of my coworkers attended. And they came back and, told me all about it. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting and really fascinating. And I looked into it myself. And when I discovered my personality type, which is, by the way, the Myers-Briggs is denoted by 4 letters and my type is an INFJ. And when I read the description on the website of this particular website that I had found, I was just like blown away. I even got like kind of emotional. I teared up a little bit and I felt like, whoa, this website description just got me to the core, like knows me better than anyone knows me in my life, and maybe even better than I know myself. I was just kind of like, had this moment of like, whoa, what is going on here? How can this seemingly simplistic model where you're just picking 4 letters really have that depth of understanding of how I tick? And so that just got me really interested and I wanted to learn more. And I really delved deep into the personality type world. And then fast forward, I had kids and I just began to naturally wonder, because I had applied personality type in every area of my life, to my spouse and to my friends and to my parents and everything, and found it so fascinating to understand what other people's types were. I naturally just began to wonder, do my children, do they have a Myers-Briggs personality type yet? Obviously they have personalities. We see that right away as soon as our kids come out. It's like, oh, this one's so different from that one. And they are just their own little people. But do they have a Myers-Briggs type yet? When does that develop? And what does that look like? And I was very curious about it. And when I discovered my children's types and began reading up on type in children and began applying some of what I was learning about them to my parenting, it kind of opened up this whole new way of looking at them and brought me a lot of tips and tricks that I began using in my parenting. And I was really personally deeply interested in it. And I had friends who were asking me more questions about it. And I just started sharing it with other people and realizing this is something that I can bring to other people. And so that's what I've started doing.
So I heard about the Myers-Briggs tests that you can take to determine your personality type. What kind of indication, for people who are not familiar with it, what kind of indications can that test and knowing your personality type give you about you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the it one thing I would say about the online assessments, and I was able to figure out my own type through doing my own kind of research, but it took more than just taking an assessment. And so I would warn people, it's a really fun way to start is to go online and search for a quiz and take the quiz and see what it comes out with. But I definitely would never rely on the results of an assessment. Even the main Myers-Briggs company assessment that has like decades of research and iterations beyond it. The thing about personality type is that it's so complicated. Like, we are complicated beings, and the personality type model is deeper and more complicated than most people realize off the bat. And there's it's just a forced choice questionnaire just can't get at the complexities of either of those things. And so and also we just answer, we're human, and we answer the questions in different ways depending on what mood we're in. Or there might be something like, we've been raised to believe that it's better to be a certain way, and maybe we believe ourselves to be that way, and we may answer in that way when really there's something different going on at the core. Whatever, there's all sorts of things that can affect that. That was a lead into what you asked me, and now I can't remember what you asked me.
What kind of information or indication does this test or assessment, even if you don't do it online, can give you about yourself?
Yeah. So I would just start with that sort of warning, but it is a really fun place to start. And then what it can really tell and help us with is it measures kind of a couple of main things, which is how you prefer to make decisions. And that's not like consciously, how do you prefer to make decisions, but what are the snap little decisions you're making all day long, and you don't even realize that there is some sort of process you've gone through to decide, like, how do I respond to this person in the moment when we're having a conversation? Or, when I am moving around the kitchen with someone else in the morning trying to get ready, how am I doing that? And just all these little teeny things we're doing all throughout the day. It's measuring how you're making those decisions. And then the second thing that it measures, the second main thing that it measures, is how you take in and process information. So, and that is really key to understanding how to communicate with other people, is understanding that if you take in and process information differently from, say, your co-parent or from your child, that there needs to be like an understanding of that on both ends, or if it's a young child, just on your end, because they're not old enough to understand that yet, and to be able to communicate differently for that person.
So that taking in information, is it going to tell you if you're auditory, visual, or sensorial, this kind of stuff, or is it something else completely different?
Yeah, it's a little different. There's some relation to that, but it's the letter pairing that deals with how you take in information is the S or the N, which stands for sensing or intuition.
Okay.
And people who prefer sensing, they tend to take in more details. They take in more practical information. They need, things that can be directly applied. They tend to rely on experiences. So when they're doing things, they rely on their past experiences and that information that they've gleaned from things they've done before. They rely on people who are more experienced and trained than them. And then on the opposite side, on the intuition side, people tend to look at things in more of a bigger picture. They tend to see the bigger picture first, and they want to hear the bigger picture before they have to drill down into the details. They tend to glom meaning onto things right off the bat. And so it's less about the practical application. It's more about the theory and what does this mean in the bigger picture. And they have like view of and insights into the future. And that's how they deal with information.
So as a parent, let's say that I tend to be more in details, and my child is seeing more the bigger picture. And I'm sure it also depends on the age of the child, right? Because they need to develop their communication. But here we're talking more about teenagers, because my audience has teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
How can I adapt, let's say, my communication with my teen if I see more in details and they see more bigger picture? How can I train myself, if you can give one or two tips, to see more big picture when I'm a detailed kind of perception person.
Yeah. And that's a great one to tackle. And I love working with families with teenagers, because the teenagers can really have a part in the process too. And they can, they're cognitively and starting to be psychologically able to do some of that self-reflection and understanding, and then relating to other people. So that's a really great age. So when you're trying to communicate, if you are a sensor trying to communicate with an intuitive, starting with the big picture, what are you getting at? Because sensors tend to work step by step to a final conclusion. And so it's unnatural for them to say the final conclusion first and then go back to the details. But that's really important, because I'm an intuitive. So I will tell you, I just tune out when people get into details. I'm like, it just doesn't, I just can't even hold those details until I've understood, why do I need these details? And so I'm trying to think of a good example of something like if there's like a chore that needs to be done, and there's specific steps that,
Like
maybe
cooking.
Sure. Like, but describing like the end result and what is that going to look like, but here's how we get there. So like, but first taking it to that end result first.
And that reminds me of my life in the corporate world, where back in my my career back several years ago, I had a supervisor, which I understand now is probably more intuitive, and I'm more sensory. You said it's called the S?
Sensing, yeah.
Sensing, where I will no, sorry, put in
Opposite.
the opposite. He would see more the details, and I would already rush to what's the goal and where are we going. And I remember that he used to say, wait, I'm not talking about that yet. And he was kind of irritated. So knowing this kind of information can even help you immensely at work, when you can kind of guess what a person is, to be able to present the information in their format so that there is no resistance. Is that something you see a lot also with in your coaching, with people using that in their career?
Yeah. And that's where I was introduced to personality type, was in the corporate world. And that's where you see Myers-Briggs specifically being used the most, is in the workplace. How do you work with teams? How do you work with your boss? How do you work with, the people under you? And it's really, really helpful in teamwork. And I love being able to then come apply it to the family, because as a family, we're somewhat of a team too, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really, really helpful with that and understanding how people work. And I was even just talking with my husband, who has a similar personality type to me. I'm INFJ and he's an INTJ. And we both use, so there's a deeper level to Myers-Briggs beyond just these surface 4 letters that we have. That's really where the meat of Myers-Briggs lives. And that's called we each have cognitive functions, or sometimes they're referred to as mental processes. But my husband and I share the same first like major cognitive function that's really big driver for who we are. And it's the rarest out of all 8 functions in Myers-Briggs. It's the rarest one. And so a lot of times we need to be aware of the fact that other people are not on the same page as us. We are thinking very differently from other people. And he was he's kind of going through this pitch. He's trying to get hired by someone, and to him it's so clear what he has to bring to them. And I was reminding him, like, we see these visions very clearly. We're really good at like envisioning future outcomes and seeing the picture so clearly. And you have to remember that you're probably pitching to people that their brains work very differently. So you need to bring in like the data that supports it, or tell a story about how what you want to do worked really well somewhere else, or something like that. So it can be really helpful in getting hired too, or something like that, or convincing people of things.
So is there, for example, me as a coach, also I teach a lot, and I need to make sure that the people that I am interacting with are really taking in what I'm explaining. And even with my kids, is there a way to train your brain and train yourself to be more middle ground, so it's more accessible to both ways of taking in information? Like, be a little bit less of your style and a little bit more of other people's style.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
train.
for sure. I like to look at the Myers-Briggs preferences as the same thing as being like right-handed or left-handed. You know, where we all have like a natural preference for one or the other. For me, I'm a right-handed. And it's whenever I have to use my left hand, say you broke your right hand or whatever your dominant hand is, and you had to use your opposite one. Oh no.
I didn't break my hand, but I have pain that forced me to learn to use the mouth with my left hand. So
oh, well, that's a perfect example. And how did that feel when you first started having to do that?
it was very clumsy, but now I have way more mastery at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just that's the same with the preferences. Like we can definitely exercise our opposite preference and get better at it. But the thing is, it's always going to be more awkward and frustrating that way. Like we can never fully make it our dominant process. And you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but when you do have use of your right hand, do you prefer to still go back to that with your mouse, even though you've been working?
I'm more precise because now it has been several years, but I'm still more precise with my right hand because I wanted to keep it that way because I know that it's good for my brain to exercise both sides. But I'm more precise on the right side. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's the same thing with preferences. Like it's still, you can get really good at, and I a lot of times I use the introversion, extroversion example. I'm someone who prefers introversion, and that doesn't mean I can't extrovert. In fact, I grew up in the theater world and performing, and I did speech and debate in high school, and I'm a podcaster, and I love connecting with people, and I've gotten really, really good at it. But at the end of the day, I'm still so much more like comfortable and relaxed and happy in my inside brain when I get to go inside of myself. And that is never going to change about me. That's still my preference. It's still what gives me the most energy. It's still what makes me the most happy and makes me function the best. But that doesn't mean I can't extrovert and get really good at that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I'm definitely like you. I'm a mix. I don't know if I need my alone time. That's for sure, to rejuvenate and replenish. I love being on stage. I also did theater and
Oh, really?
with the podcast and all that. But yeah, my initial tendency was more to be introvert. Now, with your kids, before people even take the Myers-Briggs test or they come to you to work with you, is there a way to kind of guess at the beginning what type of communication intake style their kid is, or how can they have some ideas about that, or even about themselves?
Yeah, there's you can, if you follow me on Instagram, my Instagram handle is Family Personalities, and I post a lot of little things about this is what sensing children look like. This is what intuition children look like. It's a really fun way to dip your toe in. And then I just put a download on my website. It's familypersonalities.com, and then click on downloads. And it is a download specifically to determine if your child prefers introversion or extroversion. Because that's a really good intro one, because it's something that most of us at least have somewhat understanding of what introversion and extroversion is. And so I have a download on my website for that. And, you know, I would say when you're looking at these things, we're looking for an overall pattern, not all the time what your kid is, right? And we're looking for what seems more comfortable for them versus what seems more awkward for them. And, it's not a general rule. And just because your child prefers sensing doesn't mean they can't use intuition, and vice versa.
So, which is a perfect segue for my next question. Knowing that a lot of my audience and myself do a large quantity of work on ourselves, and we see life as a school and with assignments of the different events in our life, we are morphing and shifting into someone else. Can that type change over a lifetime if you really have, let's say, very strong, emotional, impactful events, or does it stay the same?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a lot of people don't like my answer to that, which is that your personality type does actually stay static. Or your Myers-Briggs personality preferences, I won't say your personality type, your Myers-Briggs personality preferences stay static throughout your lifetime, but I'm going to say you do change as a person. Like you change, and you change the way that you bring those preferences out. You change the way that you interact with your functions, you mature them, you grow them, you stretch to the other side, and you change as a person. And like there are, you know, I don't know, INFJs, we make up like 1% of the population, so not a lot, but there's a lot of us out there when you apply that to the full population, right? And you don't meet one INFJ who's like another INFJ, right? So there's still things that affect you, that change you, whether it's trauma, whether it's things you've worked on, it makes you look like a different INFJ than someone else. But those mental processes, they're still the same between the INFJs. And there's actually, there's a professor at UCLA called Dario Nardi, who is a neuroscientist, and he has actually done brain scans, like EEG brain scans, and compared them with Myers-Briggs personality types and watched what their brain does, taking them through exercises. And it's fascinating. You can actually see that people are using their brains differently based on their personality type. And so that explains a lot of why we have these same patterns that are going on.
So in a way, knowing your Myers-Briggs type or personality components would be more like a bag of tools, and you know, that way you know what tools you have in your bag, and throughout your life you can learn to, maybe you always go with a hammer, but you learn that you have the saw in your bag, so you learn to also exercise that saw and become good at it. Mm-hmm. Is that how you would use it?
Yeah, that's one way, is learning to stretch to those other tools that maybe you don't naturally use. Another way is learning that the tool that you do use has a lot more to it than you realized, and that you can grow that as well. There's a lot of depth to each function in Myers-Briggs, and learning how to grow even the one that you're most comfortable with, that you've probably put a lot of work into, but knowing that there's more to that and that you can use it in a more mature and healthful way is also one aspect of growth in Myers-Briggs.
So I've read somewhere, I don't remember where it was, but that we tend to go more to what is naturally easy for us when you talk about attributes, qualities and personality components. And we tend to always go to the same thing because it's our zone of comfort and it's easier. Mm-hmm. Do you find that also with the clients that you work with, that we overdevelop one area maybe because it's so easy, and we tend to forget about the other ones which are more challenging?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. I'm actually in a workshop right now with that professor that I just mentioned, Dario Nardi. It's called The Magic Diamond. He has a book called The Magic Diamond, and we're doing a workshop right now where we explore something called one-sidedness, where you've overdeveloped something. And what I do want to say is that with kids, I think sometimes we too early try to have them develop all sides of themselves and stretch to sides that aren't natural to them. And then they don't have the opportunity to develop the parts of them that are more natural. And it's really important. There's been a lot of research done in the development of these different functions in us, that we focus first on developing the more natural ones and then on developing the weaker ones, that it's your development is much smoother and healthier if you approach it in that way. And so I really like to call attention to your children's top functions and help them develop those first before stretching to the other side.
So if people go to your social medias or your website, they can maybe understand a little bit more about that personality type and start really spotting areas of, let's say, components in the personality of their kids that they wouldn't have necessarily be able to discern before if they don't get the information, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great resource for people who are listening to go check your website.
Yeah, check the website, familypersonalities.com. Also, my podcast, which is called Family Personalities. We talk every episode, we have some sort of personality type topic that we're talking about in the family. And it's a lot, I think it's a lot of fun. It's my favorite thing to do, is talk about personality type. And it's a good way to dip your toe in and listen along if you're not ready to, dive into the full-on services. But yeah.
And so with your clients, do you have maybe an example of a challenge that a family was going through and that they were able to overcome because they worked with you on discovering their personality type and work with it?
Yeah. This is so funny. I did a podcast episode yesterday, and I've done a lot of these with other people because I'm just trying to like bring them. No, people don't even know this is a thing that you can do personality type with your families. And so I've done a ton of them. And yesterday was the first time I ever got this question specifically about, what's something you've worked with a family?
Oh, no
And
randomness.
no, and I answered it. And then I actually afterwards had major regrets because I was like, I mean, I didn't reveal anything identifiable about them, but it was still like, if they listened, they would know I was talking about them, and it felt like a breach of confidentiality. And so I learned my lesson yesterday that I don't want to bring in necessarily specific examples from families I've worked with, but I can tell you like personal examples that I've done in my family. And for one, there's been a big acceptance with the way that my son thinks things through. And so the third letter in Myers-Briggs is the T or the F, which is thinking versus feeling. And with a lot of these labels in Myers-Briggs, you have to scrap what you think of those words usually meaning, right? Like
Yeah.
thinkers are, it's not that just that they don't think, and it's not that just that they only think and never feel. And feelers, it's not that they only feel and aren't logical.
Yeah, but it's a dominance, right?
Yeah, well, it's a dominance, and it means actually something very different. It means that feelers, when they are making decisions, they prefer to step into a situation emotionally and consider the feelings and values of those around them and the feelings and values and desires of themselves. And they like to use that criteria to make logical decisions. Like we still make logical decisions, but it's just the criteria that we're valuing. And then with thinkers, that kind of stuff muddies up the waters and provides a lot of confusion for them. So they prefer to step out of a situation emotionally and only consider the objective logic and data points.
Yeah.
So with my son, he's a thinker. I'm a feeler. My daughter's a feeler as well. And this has been a really great reframing for me, that when people who use thinking say things that hurt feelings, that it's different from the way that I perceived it before, where I used to think, oh, they've said that knowing that it's going to hurt me. Mm-hmm. And then that feels much more painful personally, right? To think like this first person said that knowing that it was going to hurt me. Yeah. And to understand that might not have even been they might not have even realized what they were saying was going to hurt you, because their brain doesn't work in that same way. And two, it's just not a consideration. Like when they're making decisions of what they're going to say next or what they're going to do, the thinking about other people's feelings muddies up the waters. It confuses them. Mm-hmm. And so they need to step out of that logically. And so that's not an excuse that you can go around being an a-hole if you're if you're someone who's thinking. But it's helpful to understand that, especially when you have a child who tends to be blunt and may hurt other people's feelings without meaning to. And so with my son, he's an INTJ, so he uses T and he uses J, which when the letters work together, they work even differently than they do on their own. So like someone who uses T and J looks different from someone who uses T and P. They use their thinking in a different way. And so my son, who's a TJ, they're very rules based, but they don't, which means they're great at following rules, which is really nice to have a child who's a really good rule follower, but generally only if he understands the rule first. And so we had an incident once with him and my daughter, where she asked him, do you like my drawing that I made? And he said, no, I don't like it. I don't like the colors that you used, or like you used the wrong color for the dog. It's supposed to be brown or whatever. And she got really upset and started crying. And my first reaction is like, why would he say that? That's so mean. You can't tell someone you don't like their drawing. But to think about it from his end, he was just answering honestly. And the way that I have to approach those things with him is to logically walk him through how that hurts someone's feelings. So, say when you tell someone you don't like something that they made, it makes them feel like they're bad at it. And then that makes them feel really sad. And then he's able to, oh, I understand. And then I make it into a rule. So when someone asks us if we like their work, we never say, I don't like your work. You can say, you can point out one thing that you do like and one thing that you would have done differently, but you never say, I don't like your work. And then once he had that rule, he was like, oh, I got it. And now he's able to apply that rule going forward and care for people's feelings, but without having to automatically know right away what someone's feeling is going to be. You know what I mean?
Yes. And that's important, because first, as parents, if we're going to teach things like this to our kids, we have to keep in mind that we don't want them denying who they really are. It's just a question of expressing it in a way where it wouldn't be like an arrow in the heart of the other person, but it would be more diffused without denying who I am. Because it's most of the time people do things, they understand things very black and white when you first explain it to them, and they're going to say, but I'm not going to lie, because then I'm paying the price of the lie. So finding a way to express without compromising your integrity, but in a way that doesn't hurt the other person, is an art. And that's great if we can teach that to our kids, no matter if they're younger or teenagers. I find that it's beautiful, because it's a way to navigate life in a more harmonious way.
Yeah. And if you have a child who's feeling NJ, judging, they're probably pick that up very naturally, and they already understand how to, they probably have picked up great manners, and they're always encouraging people and telling them how wonderful they are. But if you have a TJ or a TP or even an FP, that can be a more learned skill for them, and knowing how to go about teaching them that skill is Myers-Briggs can be really helpful for that.
So do you see that there are some cases where the ones who are rule followers are going too far in it? Because I know in my family, sometimes I have to tell to one of my kids, like, don't be so afraid of authorities and the rules, and people don't have the power of life and death on you. So of course, follow the rules, but don't get prisoner. Don't be a prisoner of even making the rule stronger than what it really is. Do you encounter people who are, let's say, rule followers to an extreme where it does hurt them?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I can say for my own self, have definitely been more of a rule follower. The judging type, that J on the end, tends to be more rules and structures following, and especially if there's also an S. So the SJs in our society are actually really necessary. They build rules and structures and routines that keep our society working, and they're very important. But if you get too much into that, you never break out and learn new things, or you might never be true to yourself or what's inside. And so, SJ types would do well to learn how to break out of that as well. Yeah.
So teenagers are, by definition, a lot of them rule breakers and rule pushers. How can you, is there a way for, I'm like you, I'm still a rule follower, and I was extreme at it, where I had to become more balanced. So for moms like us, to try to understand the other side is sometimes very challenging, because you can't even conceive why would someone decide to break a rule and put themselves in such trouble when it's not worth it.
Yeah.
How can a mom find a way to become softer with that and more understanding, so she can solve the problem and overcome?
Yeah, it's so hard, and I don't have teenagers yet. I know it's coming, but with the adolescent brain, there's more going on, right, than just the personality type, because they're cognitively not there yet, where they're thinking of the future risks. And it's different between personality types too. And there's some types that are much more risk-taking than other types. And I know my daughter's going to be a little bit more in that camp, not as strong as maybe some other ones. She's an ISFP, and I definitely have to parent her very differently than my son, because the rules are just in one ear and out the other. Like when they're playing outside, we don't have any fences where we live. It's just very open. They're 5 and 7. And if I tell my son, you guys are not allowed to go beyond this space and this space, he will follow it. And it's great that I have both of them, because he can keep her on those rules. But if I just let her go out there, she'll just get caught up. And it's not like a defiance. It's just, she just gets caught up in the moment and isn't paying attention. And there's other kids who it is more of a defiance, because they detest rules and limits. And as soon as a limit is put on them for the sake of getting rid of it,
Yes.
they will break it, right? And so understanding which one is your child is important to be able to get at it. And for the teenagers, you want to keep them safe, right? And so it's scary. This isn't just like,
Extremely.
oh, I just need to let up, because you're terrified that something terrible is going to happen, right? And so it's really hard. And so sometimes it's just understanding which type are they. And I know I would say, if I had to kind of like rank the different types and how likely they are to be like less rule following and more breaking of the rules, I know that SPs, so people for sensing and perceiving, have more of that get caught up in the moment, and especially ESPs get caught up in the moment, going along with whatever it is, and they're very they're just very in the moment.
Yes.
And they take risks, and that risk, they're very adrenaline based too.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's understanding that they need more in their life where they get to experience that kind of thing safely.
Okay.
So whether it's being more involved in like sports and that adrenaline rush of the game, and places where they have that outlet to get that sort of feeling, so that they aren't seeking it out in less healthy ways, is helpful. And then having rules, but very few. Like, drill it down to what are the most important rules and boundaries, and enforcing those, letting the other stuff go. Oh, and there's one other thing I wanted to say, especially for SPs. They really are practical. They're a much more like practical hands-on type, and they learn best by like hands-on and actually seeing something. So you can talk and talk and talk at them all you want, and they're probably gonna zone out for one, and they're not gonna retain it or listen, but they need to see something to understand it. So even as far as like, if you're afraid of like drunk driving, you know, taking them to, and even like, it sounds horrible, but like an accident scene, and showing them like, this is what a car looks like that's been flipped, or whatever it is, and having them actually see it for themselves is really helpful for that type.
Okay, so first, of course, parents would have to really find a way to discover what their kid is, and what they are, because although you can see in your kid that they are like they love the adrenaline rush, it doesn't necessarily mean that you would have, and their feelers, it doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to take them to a scene. It could create more damage. So start with
Oh, that would have damaged me for sure.
Yeah.
Because I was already a rule follower, so my parents didn't need to add on any more fear.
Yeah. So now, if people want to work with you, but do you work only one-on-one, or do you have programs where people can do things in group? How do you provide your services?
Yeah, right now I'm just working one-on-one. I would love to provide workshops and stuff in the future, but I'm just not there. I'm homeschooling my kids now, which I never planned on doing. And but if you follow me, that's definitely something I would love to do in the future, is do some workshops and stuff like that. Right now I work one-on-one with families. I work over Zoom, so I can work with you no matter where you are in the world. And if you're interested, hit my website, familypersonalities.com, and click on book an appointment. And then I do like a quick 20-minute free intro consult with anyone who has questions, or to talk about what the process looks like.
Okay, because I was going to ask, where do they start if they're not yet ready to commit, or if they really want to get information. So that's perfect. I have a question that I ask everyone, and it's about self-love. And before I ask you that question, is the personality type will impact how you define yourself to yourself?
That's a great question. It definitely has impacted how I describe myself to myself. I would say that there were parts of myself that I used to be ashamed of that I now consider my greatest assets. And one of those would be like my sensitivity. I really felt like I grew up receiving the messaging that like, don't cry, like
you feel too much.
That's there's no reason to get emotional over this. And like, my emotions were a bad thing. And I've come to see that, one of my greatest functions is my ability to connect with other people, empathize, And that's one of the things that I've always been proud of myself for, but I didn't understand that without that sensitivity, I wouldn't have that superpower. And I think Myers-Briggs can really help you see both sides to the coin on everything. There's a function, and that function has all sorts of things around it, but you wouldn't have some of the ones you might like more if you didn't have some of the ones that you might see as more of a flaw, but that's a really important piece to it.
So it removes a part of the self-judgment, and it helps you accept yourself better because you understand yourself better, which can bring you to more self-love. And my question is, for you, what is self-love?
For me, there's a couple things. And what I just said, appreciating all parts of yourself is a really big one. And then the other one is just putting yourself first and putting your needs first, understanding what you need and making it a priority, which is so hard to do as a parent. And I'm sure even 10 times harder as a single parent. So
not only is it hard to do, but we're conditioned by society to not do it, to feel that it's selfish, when in fact, it's selfish not to do it, because if you don't replenish yourself, if you don't take care of yourself, you don't have anything to give. You give by obligation instead of giving from generosity and what's there. So it's a must. It's really a must.
And that was a really hard learned lesson for me.
Yeah, me too. And I'm still forgetting it sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Where I find myself with a backache or something, I said, okay, go back to the basics. Take care of yourself. What do you do to take care of yourself?
I know this is like very cliche, but I really love my baths. I love to take a hot bath in the evening. Getting out for regular physical activity. And I have been dealing with an injury for a couple of years, so I can't do anything like crazy hard, but just getting out for a walk. Is really important, and doing that regularly, and just having quiet time.
Yeah. Which for a mom sometimes is also challenging.
Very.
I know I had to tell my moms that even if the only place everybody's going to leave you alone is the restrooms, then you go in the restrooms and you quiet your mind for 5 minutes. You need to find a way.
Yeah, well, and I'm like, wait, alone time in the restroom? I'm pretty sure last time I was in there, I had like the whole family in there asking me questions, but
yeah,
mine are still young, so maybe that's why.
I had to train mine that don't come to me when I'm there. I can answer, because I conditioned it pretty well, so they know.
Yeah, maybe I need to start doing that. Boundaries.
Otherwise, you will be paying the price later if you don't do it now.
Yeah.
Before we leave, before we close, do you have any kind of last tip, last advice, something that you would like to leave the audience with?
I would just say, it's, I guess like this isn't even personality type related, but just go easy on yourself. I think we all just need to go easier on ourselves, especially during a global pandemic. And it's something I'm working on really hard. I'm going through a big letting go phase in my life right now, but go easy on yourself.
Yeah. And for certain personality type, it's harder than others, because I know I'm like a doer, work. And I have to force myself to work less when some people have to force themselves to work more. So it's about knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra, for being with us today and giving us a little bit of information about the personality types and how it can be used in the family. People who want to know more, they can go to your website, family types.
Familypersonalities.com.
Familypersonalities.com. And I'll put that in the description as well. And for our audience, the more you know yourself, the more you can navigate life with ease and harmony, and especially when you interact with kids. So go and discover yourself even more. See you next time with another episode. Bye. Mwah. Being a single mom can be challenging, but you don't have to face it alone. Join our community at facebook.com/groups/single and doing it all, and receive tools, tips, and free group coaching. And if you like this podcast, please review and rate us on iTunes. I would really appreciate it.